Montana Territory, early spring of 1883. The wind was sharp as a knife when the stagecoach door flung open outside the town of Alder Bend, and the woman inside stumbled out with blood on her sleeve and a warrant in her name. Her name was Josephine Keller, and she had come west to be a wife. She barely made it 3 steps before her knees gave out. "I need a doctor," a bystander called, but it was not a doctor who stepped forward through the small, gawking crowd. It was a cowboy, tall, broad-shouldered, and still dusted with hay from the feed store. He knelt beside her, hat pushed back, eyes steady. "You hurt bad?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes were glassy with pain. Her left arm was soaked in blood, and her dress was torn open at the shoulder. Someone had already tried to bandage her along the road, but it was done poorly. The cowboy pulled out a clean handkerchief from his coat pocket and pressed it against the wound. "Name's Dawson Dyer," he said gently. "You are safe now." But Josephine turned her face away, trembling. "They think I killed him." Dawson blinked. "Killed who?" She winced, then passed out cold against his chest. She woke hours later, tucked into a cot inside the back room of the town's carpenter workshop. It smelled like pine shavings and glue. Her arm was bandaged right, stitched neat. She tried to sit up, and pain flared down her ribs. "Careful," Dawson's voice said from the corner. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You tore the muscle clean through. Bullet just grazed you, but it got deep." Josephine stared at him. "Why am I here?" "You collapsed. I stitched you up." "Doc's out in Whitehall for the week, and I have steadier hands than the blacksmith." He stepped closer, voice even. "You said something about being accused of murder." She looked down. "I was a mail-order bride. I came here to wed a man named Everett Price. When I arrived, he was already dead, shot in the chest, and his sister told the sheriff I did it." Dawson's brow creased. "Did you?" "No," Josephine whispered. "I never even met him. I got off the stagecoach and walked straight into a nightmare." He watched her a moment, then nodded once. "Well, I believe you." Her breath hitched. "Why?" "Because your eyes don't lie." By the next morning, the whole town knew her name. Half believed she was a killer, the other half just wanted gossip. Sheriff Mather had no real evidence, but he let her walk for now, mostly because Dawson Dyer stood beside her when he asked questions. And Dawson had lived in Alder Bend his whole life. Folks trusted him. He gave her a place to stay, a small cot in the corner of his workshop. She worked with one arm, sweeping up sawdust, trimming wood scraps, and learning how to sand down the edges of a rough pine board. "You do not owe me your help," she said one night while stacking shavings into the stove. Dawson looked up from his workbench. "You did not ask for mine either. Some things are just right to do." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I was supposed to marry into something good. Clean start. Instead, I got blamed for a man's death and nearly bled out on a street I never saw before." Dawson walked over and handed her a mug of warm cider. "You are still breathing," he said. "That means something." It was a week before she laughed, and when she did, it came sudden and bright. Dawson had accidentally dropped a whole jar of nails across the floor, and when he slipped trying to pick them up, he muttered something under his breath that made her snort. He froze, then grinned. "There it is," he said. "What? Your real voice?" She smiled back. "You are not what I expected out of a cowboy." "What did you expect?" "Less patience. More boots on tables and whiskey breath." He chuckled. "I can do boots on tables if it helps." "No," she said, still smiling. "You were better this way." One stormy afternoon, a letter arrived. It came from a man named Preston Keller, Josephine's younger brother, the only family she had left. He had tracked the news of her accusation all the way to Montana and sent word fast. Dawson read it aloud for her, since the handwriting was shaky. "Josephine," he read, "I know you are innocent. I am headed west with everything I have to prove it. Everett Price's sister, she is lying. She had debts. I will bring proof." Josephine's hands shook as she folded the letter. "I told you," she whispered. "I never touched that man." Dawson nodded. I believe you. And it sounds like your brother is going to prove it. She looked up at him, something deep and vulnerable flickering in her eyes. Why do you keep helping me? He stepped closer, slow, steady. Because I want to, he said. Because you matter. The next day, someone threw a rock through the workshop window. Josephine screamed, ducking low. Dawson was there in a heartbeat, pulling her into his arms. It is all right, he said. You are safe. But she was shaking, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were full of tears. No one has ever protected me like this, she whispered. He reached up and gently brushed her hair back from her face. I will not let anything happen to you, he said. Not ever. That night, she could not sleep. She stepped outside onto the porch and found Dawson sitting in the rocking chair, a rifle across his lap. You are guarding me? Someone has to, he said. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder. I never wanted to fall for someone again, she said quietly. But I am afraid if I do not say this now, I will regret it. Dawson turned toward her. I feel safe with you, she said. And I think I might be falling in love with you. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. And then he leaned in and kissed her soft, careful, real. I already did, he said. Fall for you. She smiled against his chest. And for the first time in weeks, her heart felt whole. The morning after the rock shattered the window, Josephine found Dawson in the yard behind the workshop, splitting cedar logs with a heavy axe. She watched from the doorway as he struck each blow with quiet precision, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, his shoulders moving in smooth rhythm. The air held the scent of damp earth and wood oil, and somewhere nearby, a meadowlark sang from a fence post. She stepped out, careful of the broken glass they hadn't swept yet. You always do your thinking with an axe? Dawson set the blade into the chopping block and looked over. Helps me keep the world straight. She folded her arms, her shoulders still stiff beneath the bandage. Does it help with people too? He picked up a smaller piece of kindling and began shaving it down with a draw knife. Sometimes. But people are harder than wood. Josephine stepped closer, brushing a curl back behind her ear. You knew Everett Price, didn't you? Just to nod at, Dawson said. He wasn't the kind of man who built much trust. Always chasing something bigger than what he had. She lowered herself onto the edge of an upturned barrel. His sister Clara, she didn't look surprised when she saw him dead. She looked angry. He paused, knife still in his hand. You think she knew it would happen? I think she wanted something out of him, Josephine said. And now she's got nothing but me to blame. Dawson didn't answer right away. He set the kindling aside and wiped his hands on a rag. You planning to stay quiet and wait for your brother? No, she said. I want to look her in the eye and ask why she lied. He gave her a long, steady look. Then I'll walk with you. They left the workshop just before noon, following the main road through town. The townsfolk had grown quieter around Josephine, less whispering, more watching. She walked with her chin high, Dawson beside her, not touching but close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. Clara Price lived in a rented flat above the dry goods store, with lace curtains and a chipped white door. Josephine climbed the steps first and knocked twice. The door opened a crack, then wider. Clara stood in a dark green dress, her mouth pursed. You've got nerve coming here, she said. Josephine stepped forward. I want the truth. Clara's eyes narrowed. The truth is, my brother's dead. You blamed me before I even stepped off the coach. Was that your plan all along? Clara's fingers tightened on the doorknob. He promised me $50 if I could stop the wedding. Why? Clara's face worked, something bitter rising beneath her painted exterior. Because he already had a wife. In Helena. She was going to ruin him. Josephine blinked. So you lied to save his name? Clara lifted her chin. No one would have believed me. He was your fiancé on paper. But I knew if I pointed at you, people would stop asking questions. Dawson's voice was low. You let an innocent woman carry the shame just to keep your brother's secrets buried. Clara's mouth twisted, and for a moment, something like regret flashed across her face. He wasn't worth it, she said finally, and shut the door. They walked back in silence for a while until they reached the edge of the workshop yard. Josephine sat down on the porch step, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't even flinch, she said. Like my life didn't matter. Dawson sat beside her, his boot resting in the dirt. Some folks get so used to lying they forget what truth sounds like. Will anyone believe me now? I do. She turned her head and their eyes met. I mean others, she said. Dawson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded telegram. This came this morning. Your brother's in Columbus. He should be here by week's end. He's got affidavits from Helena and a marriage certificate. The sheriff said if it checks out, the charges will clear. Josephine let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then maybe I can leave this place clean. Dawson's hand brushed lightly against hers. Or maybe you don't have to leave at all. She looked at him, startled. You think I could stay here? After all this? I think, he said, you've already built something worth staying for. And I'd rather not see you right away. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched a pair of doves rise from the barn roof and circle above the cottonwoods. I was never meant for a place like this, she said softly. Dawson's voice was warm, steady. Maybe you were meant for me. She turned her face toward him, and this time when he took her hand, she didn't look away. I'd like to find out what that means, she said. If you're willing. His thumb traced the edge of her knuckles. I've been waiting on you to say it. They sat like that until the light shifted gold across the yard, and the last of winter's chill slipped away beneath the sun. The first warm rain fell 3 nights later, soft as breath against the roof of the workshop. Josephine lay awake, listening to it slide down the eaves, her shoulder aching in dull pulses beneath the bandage. Across the room, Dawson leaned over his workbench with a lantern burning low, carving a handle from hickory wood. He hadn't asked her to stay yet, not in those words. But he hadn't made any plans without her in them either. She sat up slowly, the cot creaking beneath her. What's that for? He didn't look up. A draw knife. The old one's handle cracked yesterday. You always fix things right away? Only the ones worth using. She stood, bare feet silent on the floorboards, and walked to his side. The wood curled beneath his blade like ribbon, pale and fragrant. You ever think about leaving Alder Bend? She asked. He paused, turning the piece in his hand. Once. After my father died, I thought about heading to Dakota Territory. But my ma was still here, and the land had more of him in it than any grave could hold. She rested her hand on the edge of the bench. You've made something steady here. He nodded. I wanted a place no one could take from me. A place where things grow because someone stays to tend them. She watched his hands move. I never stayed long anywhere. My family never had land. Just a wagon and a prayer. Will your brother want you back east? No. He's got a wife now. A child on the way. He'll want me safe and settled. Not trailing behind him like a ghost. Dawson looked over, his gaze steady. Then maybe this is your place too. She didn't answer then. But she didn't move away either. By the time her brother arrived, the hills were tipped in green and the last of the snow had melted from the gullies. Preston stepped off the coach in a worn coat and a tired hat, his eyes scanning the street until they landed on Josephine. He took 2 strides forward and pulled her into a tight embrace. You look like you've been through hell. She hugged him back, careful of her shoulder. Parts of it, yes. He handed her a folded bundle of papers. Marriage record, Helena. Witness statements. Bank letters. Clara Price's name is on 2 of them. Josephine held the bundle close. You came a long way. You're my sister. There's no distance too far for that. Dawson stepped forward quietly, offering his hand. Dawson Dyer. Preston shook it. You the one who kept her breathing? He nodded. Preston gave him a long look, then smiled faintly. Then I guess I owe you more than thanks. The sheriff certified the documents by week's end. Josephine's name was cleared in a single afternoon. Her signature recorded beneath the sheriff's own, then folded into the county ledger and locked away. But the relief didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a soft exhale, like something shifting back into place after being unseated too long. That evening, Josephine walked the ridge behind the workshop, where the land opened into low hills and scattered pine. Dawson found her there, her skirt pressed flat by the breeze, her eyes on the horizon. "Preston's leaving in the morning," she said without turning. "Wants to make Missoula by the end of the week." He stepped beside her. "Will you go with him?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "I thought I might at first. But I'd just be following someone else's life again." He looked out across the brushland. "What do you want, Joe?" She turned toward him. "I want to build something. Not just live where someone tells me. I want to be part of the land, not just pass through it." He took her hand, rough palm against hers. "Then stay. Not because I ask you, but because you want to." She stepped closer until their foreheads touched. "I want to." He kissed her there, beneath the open sky, where the wind smelled of wet dirt and pine needles, and the world felt wide enough for something new. Later, with twilight folding over the workshop roof, she reached into her travel bag and pulled out the ring she had never worn. The one meant for Everett Price. She held it in her palm, small and cold. "I was never meant to wear this for him," she said. Dawson took it gently, set it on the edge of the workbench, and covered her hand with his. "No," he said, "but someday, if you're ready, I'd like to give you one that fits." She leaned into him, her voice low. "I'm not waiting for someday, Dawson." He wrapped his arms around her, the scent of cedar and smoke between them. "Then stay," his touch said. "And I will," her heart answered. Josephine stood at the edge of the garden bed behind the workshop, soil damp between her fingers as she pressed the last of the seed potatoes into the earth. The sun rode low, casting a quiet warmth over the ridge, and the air held the scent of ash and lilac from a bush blooming near the rain barrel. Her sleeves were pushed up, hair tied with twine. She hadn't worn a corset in weeks. Dawson came around the side of the shop carrying 2 fence slats and a coil of wire. His boots left shallow prints in the soft dirt. "You'll have a good crop come July," he said. She sat back on her heels, brushing her palms on her skirt. "If the frost doesn't come late again." He set the boards down and leaned on one knee beside her. "You always planned in straight rows like that?" "My mother did," she said. "Said if you can't see the order in the earth, you'll never find it anywhere else." Dawson reached out, tugging a bit of straw from her hair. "You miss her?" Josephine nodded once. "She died outside St. Louis. Fever took her fast. My father followed the year after. Then it was just Preston and me." He said nothing, just sat with her while the breeze stirred the cedar trees behind the shed. "I used to think grief was like rain," she said. "But it's more like a stone in your pocket. You just carry it until it becomes part of the weight you live with." Dawson looked at her, eyes soft beneath his brow. "I got a stone or 2 of my own." They sat in a stretch of silence that felt less like absence and more like understanding. Later that evening, Josephine stood by the stove, stirring a pot of stew made from smoked venison and wild onions she'd foraged from the ridge. Dawson carved spoons from maple scraps while the fire crackled steady in the hearth. "Did you always want to be a carpenter?" she asked. He looked up briefly, the knife glancing smooth against the grain. "Not at first. I thought I'd ranch like my father. But when the cattle fever came through and we lost half the herd, I learned quick how to build fences instead of ride trails." "How old were you?" 17. "Too proud to cry about it, too green to know I should have." Josephine tasted the broth and added a pinch of salt. "Sometimes the life we plan isn't the one that fits." He set the spoon down and walked over, wiping his hands on the towel beside the stove. "You fit here," he said. "I didn't think I would," she said. "But I feel steady for the first time in a long while." Dawson reached up, brushing her cheek with the back of his fingers. "You feel like home," he said. She leaned into his touch, her voice low. "Then let's make one." That night, the wind shifted warm and dry. Dawson moved his cot beside hers without ceremony, their lantern casting long shadows across the walls. They lay beneath a quilt Josephine had mended earlier that week, her hand resting lightly atop his chest. He spoke into the quiet. "I'll build you a room of your own, with a door that faces east, So the sun finds you first. I want it to face the ridge, she said. That way I'll always see what's coming. He smiled, and she felt it in the rise of his breath beneath her palm. In the morning, he said, we'll start with the frame. She closed her eyes against the hush of the night. Start where it matters. And beside her, Dawson whispered, with you. By early May, the ridge turned thick with lupin and wild flax, and Dawson had begun laying the joists for the new room beside the workshop. Josephine stood at the edge of the clearing with a length of linen pinned to her waist, marking where the garden path might curve once the stone was hauled down from the creek bank. Behind her, Dawson's hammer lifted and fell in a slow, sure rhythm. That corner's off square, she called, shading her eyes. He paused, squinting from beneath his brim. You certain? I measured it twice. She stepped forward, kneeling beside the post. This line's drifting west. He crouched beside her, running his hand along the beam. You've got a good eye. I learned to sew first, not build. But a crooked stitch shows up just the same. He adjusted the post, tapping it back into place with the handle of the hammer. You think you'll miss stitching dresses? I think I'll be too tired to, she said, brushing dust from her knees. I'd rather mend something that keeps the wind out. He looked over, his expression unreadable. Would you ever want children? She blinked, surprised by the question's weight. Yes, she said, if the world's kind enough to make room for them. He nodded once, quiet. I think it would be. They stood together, the sun warm at their backs, and neither spoke again until the work was done for the day. That evening, a stranger arrived on horseback, his coat stained with trail dust, his face drawn tight with miles. He tethered his horse outside the livery and made straight for the sheriff's office, where a light still burned low in the window. Word traveled fast by dusk. Josephine and Dawson were sitting across from Sheriff Mather on the porch of the jailhouse. Man came from Helena, the sheriff said, folding his arms. Says he was once employed by Everett Price. Claims Everett had dealings with a man who went missing last spring. Authorities there are reopening the case. Josephine's voice was steady. How does that concern me? It doesn't, the sheriff said. But it means Clara Price's story won't hold water if it's called into court. And she knows it. Dawson leaned forward. She gone? Left this morning, the sheriff said. Took the coach south. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Josephine folded her hands in her lap. Then I suppose that's the end of it. The sheriff gave a solemn nod. Far as the law's concerned, you're owed more than an apology. But I figure what you really want is to be left alone. Dawson stood and tipped his hat. That'd be a start. Josephine didn't speak again until they were halfway home, the stars just beginning to show through the branches overhead. I don't feel angry anymore, she said softly. Just tired. You don't have to carry it any further. She looked up at him, her voice clearer now. I don't want to carry it alone. You won't, he said. Not ever. That night, they moved her few belongings into the new room. Though the roof wasn't yet shingled and the windows still lacked glass. They slept beneath open sky, wrapped in quilts, the scent of fresh timber in the air. He held her close, and she pressed her face to his collarbone. I want to marry you, she whispered. He didn't hesitate. Then we will. They wed 2 weeks later, in the clearing behind the workshop. The preacher came from Pony on a borrowed mule, and the neighbors brought baskets of bread and jars of pickled beets. Josephine wore a dress stitched from flour sacks, dyed with walnut husks, her hair braided with sprigs of sage. Dawson wore his Sunday shirt, sleeves rolled to the wrist, his hands calloused and clean. When the vows were done and the rings exchanged, his made from a hammered silver coin, hers from the iron of a horseshoe he'd shaped himself, Dawson touched her cheek with the gentleness of a man who knew exactly what he held. Ready to build the rest of it? He asked. Josephine smiled, tears threading her lashes. With both hands, they danced beneath lanterns strung between fence posts, the music led by a fiddle and an old man's harmonica. Preston stood at the edge of the yard with his wife, their child asleep on her hip, and raised a hand in quiet blessing. By the time the moon rose full over Alder Bend, Josephine and Dawson had stepped away from the gathering, their fingers intertwined, their path lit only by memory and trust. Years passed. Seasons turned. The garden bloomed each spring with onions, sage, and rows of straight-planted beans. The workshop grew room by room, a loft for tools, a lean-to for drying lumber, then a second bedroom when the baby arrived. A girl born in the early hours of a stormy March with her mother's fire and her father's quiet eyes. They named her Lark because she came with the morning. Josephine taught her to thread a needle and listen for the weather in the wind. Dawson taught her to plane a board until it sang beneath her palm. Together, they built her a cradle from pine, a swing from cotton rope, a life from steady hands and open hearts. The house stood just off the ridge, facing the place where the trees thinned and the sky opened wide. And each morning, Josephine stood at the door with her daughter on her hip, watching the sun rise over the hills. She had not been born to this land, but in time it had claimed her. And Dawson, he never stopped carving her name into the grain of the days they shared. They grew old together, and their love quiet, stubborn, and deeply earned never once faded. It only deepened like the roots of the cottonwoods, holding fast through every wind.